September 1st, 1948, 2:47 a.m. The flash didn't just take a picture, it took a future. LAPD storms 8334 Ridpath Drive like an army conquering enemy territory. Sirens wail through the Hollywood hills, cutting through the laughter and jazz music that had been floating from the modernist house just moments before. Inside, beautiful people in expensive clothes scramble like startled deer. Drinks spilling onto Persian rugs, cigarettes burning forgotten in crystal ashtrays. Handcuffs click with the finality of closing coffins. Camera bulbs explode like artillery fire, each flash illuminating another face destined for front-page infamy. In the harsh police station light that follows, golden hair catches the photographer's flash like spun silk catching fire, but her eyes, those famous blue eyes that had graced a dozen magazine covers, now reflect the exact moment dreams die and nightmares are born. Prisoner 91256. Lila Leeds, 22 years old, MGM's golden girl, 5'6" of manufactured perfection. Reduced to a cautionary tale in the space between one flashbulb pop and the next. The booking officer's voice drones through the charges. Conspiracy to possess marijuana. Possession of marijuana. The words float through the air like smoke from the very substance that's destroying her life. Across the cramped booking room, Robert Mitchum leans back in his metal chair with that characteristic half-smirk that will soon become his trademark, already calculating how this scandal will enhance his bad boy appeal. His publicist will later spin this arrest as proof of his authentic masculinity, his willingness to live dangerously in a world of manufactured studio personas. Same charges, same night, same flash. The only difference? The chromosome that will determine which of them becomes a legend and which becomes a lesson plan. The mugshot photographer adjusts his equipment, indifferent to the magnitude of what he's documenting. Look straight ahead, Miss Leeds. The flash explodes again, and in that split second, more than just light is captured, an entire future is incinerated. This image will become more famous than any movie role she never got to play. More widely distributed than any publicity still MGM ever commissioned. Beauty meeting brutality, innocence encountering industry mathematics. The photograph crystallizes everything wrong with a system designed to protect its men and sacrifice its women like ancient gods, demanding virgin offerings. Headlines are already being set in newspaper offices across America. Movie stars in dope raid. But the real story isn't about marijuana. It's about a double standard so brutal it can destroy lives in the space between flashbulb and front page, between action and cut, between promise and betrayal. The golden hair that once caught studio spotlights with the luminosity of an angel now catches police photography with the harsh reality of a criminal. Same illumination, different destiny. Same face, different fate. In that cramped station between the smell of coffee and desperation, two careers are being decided with the precision of a script already written by forces neither of them fully understand. Mitchum will become immortal, his arrest transforming into folklore, his mugshot a collector's item, his post-scandal films among cinema's greatest achievements. Lila will become a warning, her beauty frozen in time as evidence of moral decay, her dreams sacrificed on the altar of public morality, her name forever linked not to stardom but to scandal. Hollywood forgives its men, it files its women under Exhibit A. The girl who would become Hollywood's most expensive cautionary tale entered the world as Lila Lee Wilkinson on January 28, 1925, in the wheat-covered farmland of Iola, Kansas, where dreams grew as wild and hopeless as prairie grass. Even as a child barely old enough to walk, she possessed that dangerous combination that would define her entire brief flight toward stardom. Luminous beauty married to crushing naivety. Ethereal loveliness wrapped around a trusting heart that had never learned to recognize predators. Her mother, Margaret, was a woman worn down by the Great Depression's relentless grinding, but she recognized something supernatural in her daughter's appearance, the way sunlight seemed to seek out Lila's golden hair, how her smile could transform a room full of worried adults into people who remembered what hope felt like. Her father, Samuel, worked whatever jobs existed in Depression-era Kansas, from wheat harvesting to railroad maintenance, his calloused hands a stark contrast to his daughter's porcelain perfection. The family's tiny house on Elm Street was a shrine to Hollywood dreams. Lila's bedroom walls bloomed with magazine cutouts of Jean Harlow, Carole Lombard, and Lana Turner, blonde goddesses who had conquered the silver screen and transformed themselves from ordinary girls into celestial beings worshipped by millions. But none of the images showed what happened to the ones who didn't make it, who fell from grace before their names could be etched in Hollywood sidewalks, whose dreams turned into cautionary tales told in whispers. At school, teachers noticed how other children seemed drawn to Lila like moths to flame, not just because of her extraordinary beauty, but because she possessed an otherworldly quality that suggested she belonged somewhere far beyond the confines of small-town Kansas. She was the girl who played princess in every school play, who sang solos in church choir despite having no formal training, whose very presence seemed to promise that magic was real and dreams could come true. The first signs of her destiny appeared when she was 14. A traveling photographer setting up portraits in the town square took one look at her and offered to shoot her for free, claiming he'd never seen bone structure like hers outside of Hollywood studios. The resulting photographs were so stunning that Margaret Wilkinson began harboring secret thoughts about her daughter's future. Thoughts that involved train tickets to California and contracts with movie studios. Beauty was her blessing and her curse, stopping traffic in small-town Kansas while simultaneously preparing her for destruction in big city California. Boys fought over her attention while girls whispered that she thought she was too good for their farming community. The truth was more complex. Lila didn't think she was better than anyone, but she carried within her an unshakable conviction that her life was meant for something larger than marriage to a wheat farmer and decades of Sunday church socials. The pilgrimage west came at 17, during the summer of 1942, when World War II had transformed America into a country of impossible dreams and broken promises. Armed with a battered suitcase held together with rope, $43 saved from babysitting jobs, and unlimited faith in her own luminous potential, she bought a Greyhound bus ticket to Los Angeles and left behind everything she'd ever known. Hollywood in 1942 was a factory of dreams and heartbreak operating at wartime capacity, where beauty was currency more valuable than gold and innocence was a liability that could bankrupt careers before they began. She possessed both commodities in dangerous abundance, walking into casting offices like a rose planting itself in toxic soil, beautiful and fragrant but completely unprepared for the poison that would soon seep through her roots. The first months were a brutal education in the difference between dreaming about stardom and surviving its pursuit. She lived in a boarding house near Vine Street, where aspiring actresses shared rooms and stories of near misses with fame, where every day brought new hope and every night delivered fresh disappointment. The other girls recognized her extraordinary beauty but also sensed her dangerous naivety, trying to warn her about the wolves disguised as agents, the producers who demanded more than screen tests, the photographers whose sessions evolved into situations that required careful negotiation. Could their early experiences have prepared them for what was coming? Nothing in the wheat fields of Kansas could have prepared a farm girl for the sophisticated machinery of Hollywood destruction, especially when that machinery was designed to consume its own children with the efficiency of a combine harvester. The spotlight that would make her famous was already warming up to burn her alive, and she was walking directly into its beam with the trusting smile of someone who believed in fairy tales. The break that would change everything came through a chance encounter at Schwab's Pharmacy on Sunset Boulevard, though not the romantic discovery story that Hollywood publicists would later fabricate. Lila was working as a car hop at a drive-in restaurant, serving hamburgers to actors and industry workers who barely noticed the girl behind the uniform. But one evening, a talent scout from MGM named Harry Friedman stopped by for coffee and nearly dropped his cup when he saw her. "Jesus Christ," he whispered to his companion, "look at that kid. She's like Harlow and Turner had a baby who was raised by angels." Within a week, Lila was sitting in MGM's Culver City offices, signing a contract that promised to transform her from small-town girl into international star. The studio's publicity department immediately began crafting her origin story, transforming her Kansas farm background into something more glamorous while maintaining enough wholesomeness to appeal to middle American sensibilities. MGM's talent development machine was a precision instrument designed to transform raw beauty into manufactured stardom, and Lila was their most promising raw material in years. They rechristened her Lila Leeds, the surname chosen to suggest European sophistication while remaining pronounceable in Peoria, and began the complex process of creating a star from scratch. The transformation was breathtaking and bewildering. Dialect coaches smoothed away her Kansas accent, replacing prairie vowels with the mid-Atlantic inflections that audiences associated with sophistication. Dance instructors taught her to move with the fluid grace of a swan, while acting coaches showed her how to project emotions that would read clearly in close-up. Hairstylists sculpted her natural blonde into platinum perfection, and costume designers draped her figure in gowns that seemed designed by gods rather than humans. Photo sessions became daily rituals, each shoot more elaborate than the last. Photographers captured her in flowing evening gowns that emphasized her ethereal beauty, in tight sweaters that showcased her figure, in casual moments that seemed effortlessly perfect. The resulting images possessed an almost supernatural quality. Lila appeared to glow from within, as if lit by some internal source that made ordinary mortals seem dim by comparison. The publicity machine cranked into overdrive, generating breathless copy about the Kansas goddess, who would soon set screens ablaze. Fan magazines ran features titled "The Girl Who Makes Men Forget Their Own Names" and "Lila Leeds, Tomorrow's Queen of Hollywood." Each story built upon the previous one, creating a mythology around her that exceeded anything based in reality. But beneath the surface glamour, hairline cracks were already forming in the perfect facade. The studio system operated according to mathematics that didn't account for human frailty. She needed to be glamorous enough for headlines but pure enough for wholesome image. Sophisticated enough for elite social circles but innocent enough to represent American values. Available enough to seem attainable but untouchable enough to maintain mystique. The contradiction was like asking someone to be simultaneously fire and ice, earth and air, saint and sinner. The pressure created stress fractures in her personality that would eventually shatter under the weight of impossible expectations. But for now, in those early months of 1947, she floated on golden clouds of possibility, unaware that the air was getting thinner with each promotional appearance, each publicity photo, each step closer to the spotlight that was warming up to incinerate everything she'd ever dreamed of becoming. The ascent to stardom felt like floating on golden clouds, shot through with lightning, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. MGM positioned Lila as their answer to every other studio's blonde bombshell, unleashing publicity campaigns that proclaimed her the golden girl of tomorrow with the confidence of generals announcing certain victory. Magazine covers multiplied like wildfire across America. Photoplay, modern screen, silver screen, each one more breathtaking than the last. Her screen tests revealed layers of talent that justified the studio's enormous investment in her future. Directors who had worked with legends like Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford noted her natural ability to convey complex emotions with the subtlest expression changes, a vulnerability that cameras captured like honey poured over broken glass. She wasn't just another pretty face in an industry overflowing with beautiful women. She possessed that indefinable star quality, a luminescence that seemed to emanate from within, rather than being painted on by makeup artists. The studio's coaching intensified as her debut approached. Method acting instructors taught her to access genuine emotions for dramatic scenes, while comedy specialists showed her how to deliver lines with the timing that separated stars from supporting players. Voice coaches worked to eliminate the last traces of her Kansas accent, replacing it with the sophisticated tones that audiences associated with leading ladies. Dancing masters put her through grueling rehearsals that transformed her natural grace into choreographed perfection. But the social pressures were overwhelming in ways that no amount of studio training had prepared her to handle. Every public appearance faced microscopic scrutiny from fan magazines, gossip columnists, and moral watchdog organizations looking for evidence of Hollywood's corrupting influence. Every relationship was analyzed for scandal potential. Every word weighed for career implications. Every gesture studied for signs of the moral decay that critics claimed was inherent in the entertainment industry. For someone raised in small-town simplicity where the biggest social challenge had been choosing between Methodist and Baptist church services. Managing a Hollywood image while maintaining personal authenticity proved nearly impossible. She was a butterfly being asked to perform heart surgery, beautiful, delicate, and utterly unprepared for the precision required to survive in an environment designed to destroy anything that couldn't adapt to its demands. MGM executives began delivering warnings wrapped in paternal concern but carrying unmistakable threats about the consequences of scandal. Louis B. Mayer himself called her into his office for what he described as a fatherly chat, but which felt more like a court-martial. "You're our golden girl, Lila," he told her, his voice carrying the weight of millions of dollars in investment. "But gold tarnishes easily. One mistake, one photograph, one wrong party, and all of this disappears faster than morning fog." The studio system tolerated rebellion from male stars as evidence of authentic masculinity. Clark Gable's gambling, Spencer Tracy's drinking, Errol Flynn's legal troubles were transformed into proof of their virile appeal. But the same system demanded absolute moral purity from female properties, expecting them to embody impossibly perfect combinations of sex appeal and wholesome virtue. It was mathematics designed to fail, equations that couldn't be solved because the variables were mutually exclusive. The parties grew more exclusive as her star rose, the guest lists reading like who's who of Hollywood royalty. Robert Mitchum entered her orbit during this period like a gravitational force, his established bad boy reputation making anyone in his vicinity guilty by association in the eyes of studio moral guardians. Their friendship was genuine but professionally toxic. He was already established enough to survive scandal, while she was still climbing toward heights from which falls could be fatal. These gatherings took place in modernist mansions perched on hillsides above the city, where Hollywood's elite unwound from the pressures of maintaining public perfection. The conversations were sophisticated, the liquor expensive, the atmosphere charged with the electricity of people who believed they were above ordinary rules. For a girl who had never experienced anything more exotic than church socials, these events were both thrilling and terrifying. The contradiction became unsustainable as her fame increased. Photo shoots by day captured angelic wholesomeness suitable for family consumption, while nights required navigation through social minefields. where illegal substances were as common as champagne and moral boundaries blurred under the influence of wealth and perceived invincibility. She was expected to embody perfection while surrounded by perfectly imperfect people whose flaws were either ignored or celebrated, depending on their gender and box office value. Professional opportunities remained frustratingly limited despite her obvious star quality and the millions MGM had invested in her development. Studio executives seemed content to use her primarily as publicity property, showcasing her at premieres and photo opportunities while offering only supporting roles in forgettable productions designed to establish her presence without risking major investment in unproven commodity. She watched lesser talents receive starring opportunities while her own career remained perpetually in development, a cruel limbo reserved for those too valuable to discard but too dangerous to fully promote. The studio was waiting for perfect vehicle, perfect co-star, perfect director, perfect moment that seemed to recede further into future with each passing month. The pressure created stress fractures in her personality that became more pronounced as success grew. Behind closed doors, away from photographers and publicity agents, she began experiencing anxiety attacks that left her gasping for breath. Sleep became elusive as her mind raced through endless calculations of what she could and couldn't do, say, be seen with, be photographed doing. The Golden Girl was being slowly crushed by the weight of her own supposed perfection. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? The question haunted her during sleepless nights when she stared at her reflection in her Beverly Hills apartment's mirrors, seeing a face that belonged on magazine covers but feeling like a stranger inhabiting someone else's dreams. The spotlight was heating up with each passing day, and she was about to learn that what illuminates also burns, that the same light that makes stars visible also makes them vulnerable to forces beyond their control. The distance between her public image and private reality was widening beyond sustainable limits, creating psychological tensions that would soon require release. The Golden Girl was walking toward an explosion that would transform her from rising star into falling star, from tomorrow's queen into yesterday's cautionary tale, from person into exhibit in the ongoing trial of Hollywood's moral character. The explosion that would reshape two careers and illustrate Hollywood's gender-based double standards with surgical precision came without warning. Though the fuses had been burning for months like slow-motion dynamite counting down toward inevitable detonation. September 1st, 1948, a date that would divide Lila's life into before and never again, creating a temporal border as absolute as the Berlin Wall. The party at 8334 Ridpath Drive seemed identical to dozens of others. Hollywood's elite gathering in a modernist mansion overlooking the city lights, unwinding from the pressures of maintaining public perfection through carefully orchestrated private imperfection. The guest list read like a casting call for Olympus: established stars, rising talents, directors whose names were becoming legend, producers who controlled careers with the arbitrary power of ancient gods. Lila arrived wearing a simple black dress that transformed her into liquid starlight, her golden hair catching the interior lighting like spun silk. She moved through conversations about upcoming films, contract negotiations, and industry gossip with the careful grace of someone navigating a minefield disguised as a cocktail party. Robert Mitchum was there naturally, holding court with his characteristic combination of world-weary wisdom and dangerous charm that made everyone around him feel simultaneously more sophisticated and more vulnerable. The atmosphere was charged with the electricity of people who believed themselves above ordinary rules, who had achieved enough success to assume they were insulated from consequences that affected mere mortals. Expensive liquor flowed like water. Cigarettes burned in crystal ashtrays, and conversations ranged across topics that would never appear in fan magazines. The real politics of studio power, the private lives hidden behind publicity facades, the substances that helped beautiful people cope with pressures that came with being worshipped by millions. Someone produced marijuana, not unusual for gatherings where creativity was valued, and conventional morality was considered quaint relic of less enlightened times. For most present, it was no different from the illegal alcohol that had been commonplace during Prohibition, just another way for sophisticated adults to demonstrate their independence from puritanical restrictions that seemed designed to control people who had transcended ordinary limitations. But someone had made a phone call. Perhaps a rejected actor seeking revenge. Maybe a moral crusader with connections to police department. Possibly even a studio executive worried about controlling increasingly independent stars. The motivation would never be determined, but the consequences would reshape American entertainment forever. The raid hit like lightning striking clear sky. LAPD stormed through the front door at exactly 2:47 a.m. Their shouts cutting through jazz music and elegant conversation like machine gun fire through silk curtains. Beautiful people in expensive clothes scattered like startled deer, drinks spilling onto Persian rugs. Cigarettes burning forgotten in ashtrays as hands reached skyward in surrender. In the chaos that followed, Lila found herself pressed against a wall, watching her dreams disintegrate in real time like sugar sculptures melting under blowtorch heat. The charges being shouted seemed to come from another universe. Conspiracy to possess marijuana, possession of marijuana contributing to moral delinquency. Words that would follow her for the rest of her abbreviated career. The booking room at the Hollywood police station became a theater of cruelty disguised as justice. While newspaper photographers gathered like vultures sensing carrion, the arrested celebrities were processed with the methodical efficiency of an abattoir. Names, addresses, occupations, charges, each detail recorded with bureaucratic precision that transformed human beings into criminal statistics. Mitchum handled his processing with characteristic nonchalance, already understanding that scandal would enhance rather than damage his rebel brand. His publicist would later spin the arrest as proof of his authentic masculinity. His willingness to live dangerously in a world of manufactured studio personas. He posed for his mugshot with the same casual defiance he brought to film roles, creating an image that would become collector's item rather than evidence of criminal behavior. Lila's processing was an entirely different spectacle. The photographers sensed vulnerability like sharks detecting blood, their flashbulbs exploding with increasing frequency, as she stood trembling in the harsh fluorescent light. Her famous golden hair still caught the camera with supernatural luminosity. But her eyes, those blue eyes that had graced magazine covers and inspired poetry from fans, now reflected the exact moment dreams die and nightmares are born. "Look straight ahead, Miss Leeds." The mugshot photographer's voice was professionally indifferent to the magnitude of what he was documenting. The flash exploded again, and in that split second of illumination, more than just light was captured. An entire future was incinerated, a career was ended, a cautionary tale was born. This image would become more famous than any movie role she never got to play, more widely distributed than any publicity photograph MGM had ever commissioned. The immediate aftermath revealed the entertainment industry's savage double standards with the clarity of an anatomy lesson. While Mitchum's arrest generated sympathetic coverage that enhanced his outlaw appeal, Lila's obvious distress was interpreted as confirmation of guilt and moral weakness. The same vulnerability that had made her compelling on screen now seemed to prove every negative assumption about her character and the corrupting influence of Hollywood glamour. Morning brought headlines that screamed across America like air raid sirens, "Movie stars in dope raid." The story contained everything newspaper editors dreamed of: glamour, scandal, moral panic, and the destruction of innocence. But the narrative being constructed wasn't about justice or proportional punishment. It was about sacrifice, about offering beautiful victims to satisfy public hunger for moral superiority and vicarious punishment. MGM's response was swift and merciless as a guillotine blade. Her contract was suspended before the morning newspapers hit the stands. Publicity materials were destroyed like evidence of collaboration with enemy forces, and future commitments were canceled with the efficiency of military operation. The machine that had created her golden image now devoted its considerable resources to erasing every trace of her existence from studio history. The legal proceedings that followed became a media circus that further illustrated Hollywood's gender-based mathematics. Mitchum's court appearances generated coverage that celebrated his rebellious charisma and authentic masculinity, while Lila's presence in courtrooms was treated as confirmation of moral failure and evidence of Hollywood's corrupting influence on American youth. The same justice system seemed to apply different standards based on gender and established career status, protecting valuable male properties while sacrificing expendable female ones. Personal relationships collapsed like a house of cards in hurricane winds. Friends disappeared overnight, unwilling to risk their own reputations through continued association with someone who had become radioactive in industry terms. Romantic interests evaporated as potential suitors calculated the career costs of being linked to Hollywood's newest pariah. The isolation was complete and devastating, golden girl to leper in the space between arrest and arraignment. Hollywood forgives its men. It exhibits its women as warnings to others who might consider similar transgressions. The aftermath of the arrest felt like living inside a photograph negative where everything was reversed. What had been bright became dark. What had been promising became threatening. What had been golden became tarnished beyond recognition or repair. Prison, when it finally came after months of legal proceedings, was almost relief compared to the public humiliation that had preceded it like a prolonged execution. The 60-day sentence provided respite from flashbulbs and shouted questions from reporters who treated her like a specimen in a laboratory rather than a human being whose life was being systematically destroyed. The Los Angeles County Jail for Women was a concrete monument to society's judgment, where she found herself sharing cells with prostitutes, thieves, and drug addicts, who at least had the advantage of never having pretended to be anything other than what they were. The institutional routine forced confrontation with realities she had avoided during her meteoric rise through Hollywood's stratosphere. Strip away the makeup, designer clothing, and studio publicity, and what remained? The question tormented her during long prison nights when sleep was interrupted by the sounds of other women crying, arguing, or simply trying to survive until morning brought another day of confinement. Letters from fans continued arriving, forwarded by her agent, who seemed more interested in documenting her fall than in providing support. The correspondence revealed the true cost of her transformation from golden girl to cautionary tale, where fans had once expressed admiration for her beauty and talent. They now delivered disappointment, moral judgment, and schadenfreude disguised as concern for her soul. Some offered forgiveness contingent on public repentance and dramatic renunciation of Hollywood's sinful influence. Others condemned her as proof of the entertainment industry's corrupting power over innocent young women from wholesome American backgrounds. The cruelest letters came from young women who had once seen her as inspiration, and now felt betrayed by her fall from grace, as if her arrest had personally destroyed their own dreams of stardom. Prison also brought unexpected education in the realities of female criminality that shattered her remaining illusions about justice and moral equivalency. The women she met had committed crimes ranging from petty theft to assault, but their stories revealed patterns of abuse, abandonment, and economic desperation that made her own troubles seem almost trivial by comparison. Yet she was the one whose photograph appeared on front pages across America, whose story was dissected by moral authorities as evidence of societal decay. Upon release, the entertainment industry's doors remained sealed with the finality of tomb entrances. MGM had completely severed all ties, destroying her publicity photographs and removing her name from credits of films she had appeared in before the scandal. Other studios wouldn't risk association with her toxic reputation, and even B-movie producers hesitated to cast her in anything beyond exploitation films specifically designed to profit from her notoriety. The single exception was She Shoulda Said No, 1949, an exploitation film that capitalized directly on her scandal with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The producers offered her the lead role partly as publicity stunt and partly as final humiliation, casting the former Golden Girl as a cautionary tale about the dangers of drug use, forcing her to reenact her own destruction for entertainment value. The irony was almost unbearable. After years of dreaming about starring roles, she was finally offered one that required her to play herself at her lowest moment, to transform her genuine tragedy into theatrical warning for audiences who came to see the fallen angel perform her own destruction. It was simultaneously her only professional opportunity and her ultimate degradation, trading on real-life trauma for the amusement of people who wanted to feel superior to someone who had once seemed blessed by gods. The premiere of She Shoulda Said No became a surreal nightmare that crystallized everything wrong with her situation. Standing behind theater curtains while audiences whispered and pointed, she understood that she had become something worse than forgotten. She had become a lesson. The poster outside featured her face with the tagline, "The price of one mistake," as if her entire existence could be reduced to a single moment of poor judgment. Watching from the wings as audiences laughed at her cinematic destruction, she realized the transformation was complete and irreversible. The person who had once been Lila Leeds, Golden Girl, and tomorrow's Queen of Hollywood no longer existed. In her place stood Exhibit A in the ongoing prosecution of Hollywood's moral character, living proof that the industry's glamorous promises came with hidden costs that could destroy lives with shocking efficiency. Financial pressures forced increasingly desperate compromises that further eroded what remained of her dignity and professional reputation. Nightclub appearances in venues where respectability was already compromised, publicity stunts that traded on her notoriety rather than her talent, and worse propositions that treated her as carnival curiosity rather than former movie star became her primary sources of income. Each acceptance felt like selling another piece of her soul to pay for basic survival in a world that had transformed her from princess to pariah in the space of a single flashbulb. The golden hair that had once caught studio lights with supernatural beauty now caught the desperate illumination of strip club stages and low-rent theaters where audiences came to gawk at the fallen star rather than appreciate her performance abilities. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Lila, the question became academic as she realized that Hollywood's judgment was permanent and absolute, carved in stone tablets that could never be revised or appealed. The flash that had captured her face in that police station had frozen her in time. Forever 22, forever guilty. Forever the girl who should have known better than to trust an industry built on beautiful lies. The years that followed scandal unfolded like slow-motion erasure, each passing season making her former stardom seem more like shared delusion than documented reality. While Robert Mitchum's career reached stratospheric heights, his post-prison films becoming classics that proved male stars could not only survive moral controversies but transform them into career-defining mythology. Lila faded into obscurity so complete it seemed deliberately orchestrated. The contrast became more painful each year as Mitchum's legend grew while her name disappeared from entertainment industry memory banks. His arrest had become folklore, his mugshot a collector's item that enhanced his rebellious appeal. Film noir directors cast him specifically because of his criminal record, believing it added authenticity to his portrayals of morally ambiguous characters. The same charges that had destroyed her completely had elevated him to iconic status. Small theater work became her primary means of survival, performing in productions that traded more on her notoriety than her talent. These were often in venues where respectability was already compromised. Burlesque houses trying to add class to their acts, touring shows that attracted audiences curious to see the fallen angel in person, dinner theaters where her name on the marquee generated more interest than the quality of the production. Each performance felt like a form of public penance, displaying herself for the amusement and moral superiority of audiences who remembered her scandal better than her brief moment of stardom. The applause, when it came, carried undertones of schadenfreude rather than genuine appreciation. People clapping for the spectacle of witnessing someone who had fallen from great heights rather than celebrating artistic achievement. Teaching drama and dance became her refuge during these wilderness years, working with aspiring performers who knew her story only as cautionary tale, if they knew it at all. The younger students sometimes recognized her name from film history courses or exploitation film retrospectives, while older ones might remember her scandal without recalling her brief promise as serious actress. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now preparing others for an industry that had chewed her up and discarded her like defective merchandise. But she found genuine satisfaction in helping young talents avoid her mistakes, sharing hard-won wisdom about the hidden costs of fame and the importance of protecting oneself from the machinery designed to consume its own children. Geographic escape provided temporary relief from the suffocating atmosphere of Hollywood judgment. Lila eventually relocated to smaller cities where her face wasn't immediately recognizable, and her story wasn't common knowledge among entertainment industry professionals. These moves offered fresh starts, but also emphasized how completely her identity had become welded to a single night of poor judgment. The notebook she kept during these years revealed someone still grappling with fundamental questions about justice, gender, and the price of fame in a system that seemed designed to protect some while destroying others. "I had the looks but not the luck" appeared repeatedly in different handwriting styles, as if she were trying different approaches to solving a puzzle that might make sense of her meteoric rise and equally dramatic fall. The entry showed someone who never stopped loving the craft of performance even while learning to hate the business surrounding it. She wrote about the joy of helping students discover their own talents, the satisfaction of creating art without commercial pressures, the peace that came from living below the radar of public scrutiny. But underneath ran constant current of regret for opportunities lost and dreams destroyed by forces beyond her control. Personal relationships remained complicated by her history and the burden of notoriety that followed her like shadow. Potential romantic partners fell into predictable categories. Those seeking to reform her as proof of their own moral superiority. Those wanting to exploit her notoriety for their own purposes, and those genuinely caring but ultimately unable to handle the social costs of association with someone carrying her particular burden. The pattern repeated itself with devastating consistency, reinforcing her growing belief that authentic love might be impossible for someone branded with scarlet letter of scandal. Each failed relationship felt like additional confirmation that her single mistake had poisoned every aspect of her existence, past, present, and future. Religious faith became both comfort and complication during this period of exile from the industry that had briefly claimed to love her. The Methodist Church of her childhood offered solace and community, but organized religion often treated her as symbol of moral failure rather than soul-seeking redemption and healing. The contradiction between Christian teachings about forgiveness and social judgment created additional confusion for someone already struggling to understand how quickly dreams could become nightmares. Were these final decisions acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? The question seemed less relevant than her growing acceptance that some chapters of life simply couldn't be rewritten, regardless of how unfair their original authoring might have been. The Golden Girl was learning to find peace as an ordinary woman, though the transformation required abandoning dreams that had once seemed destined to come true. As decades passed, her story began serving different purposes than originally intended. Academic studies positioned her case as textbook example of Hollywood's disposable attitude toward female beauty and the systematic nature of industry misogyny. Gender studies professors used her experience to illustrate how society punishes women for behaviors it celebrates in men, while film historians cited her treatment as evidence of the studio system's brutal efficiency in protecting valuable male properties while sacrificing expendable female ones. The end, when it finally came in 1999, was as quiet as her earlier fame had been loud. Lila Leeds died far from Hollywood in a small apartment filled with photographs from her brief moment in the spotlight, surrounded by students and fellow teachers who knew her as dedicated educator rather than fallen star. There were no studio obituaries, no retrospective articles celebrating her contributions to cinema, no memorial services attended by former colleagues who had long since moved on to other concerns. Even death couldn't free her from that single night in September 1948. The obituaries that did appear focused more on her scandal than her talent, more on her tragedy than her humanity, more on the cautionary tale she had been forced to become than the artist she had dreamed of being. She remained defined by that mugshot, frozen in time as evidence of moral failure rather than victim of systematic injustice. But perhaps the most fitting memorial wasn't any official recognition. It was the countless young women who heard her story and learned to protect themselves from the machinery designed to consume its own children. Her legacy lived on in every performer who demanded equal treatment, who refused to accept blame for others' moral failings, who insisted on the same redemption opportunities offered to their male counterparts. Hollywood forgives its men. It files its women under Exhibit A. 70 years later, we finally understand who was really on trial in that courtroom, and whose conviction was predetermined long before the first witness took the stand. Today, more than 2 decades after her quiet death, Lila Leeds' story resonates with renewed urgency that would have amazed and perhaps comforted her during her years of exile. In an era defined by #MeToo revelations and ongoing discussions about gender inequality in entertainment, her tragedy seems less like historical curiosity and more like prophetic warning about patterns that continue repeating with depressing consistency across generations and industries. Her mugshot has achieved different kind of immortality than she originally dreamed of, appearing in museum exhibitions dedicated to Hollywood's golden age darkness, documentary films about the price of fame, and university courses that refuse to let her story disappear into entertainment history's darker corners. That image of golden hair catching harsh police station light has been reclaimed. No longer proof of guilt, but evidence of systematic injustice that continues operating with increasingly sophisticated subtlety. The #MeToo movement recontextualized her experience within broader patterns of exploitation and abandonment that activists continue working to dismantle. Her tragedy now seems less like isolated incident and more like early example of institutional misogyny that transcends individual cases, part of larger system designed to protect powerful men while sacrificing vulnerable women who threaten established hierarchies. Modern entertainers facing scandal often invoke her story as evidence of how far the industry has evolved, or hasn't, Each new controversy generates comparisons, measuring contemporary responses against the merciless abandonment she experienced, creating benchmark for progress that often reveals how little has fundamentally changed in the intervening decades. Social media has given her story viral new life, with posts regularly highlighting the injustice of her treatment compared to Mitchum's rehabilitation and celebration. Young audiences discovering her case often express shock at the obvious double standards. But older observers note how similar patterns continue playing out with different players and more sophisticated public relations strategies. The entertainment industry has developed more nuanced approaches to scandal management, but the essential mathematics remain largely unchanged. Male performers continue surviving and often profiting from controversies that would destroy their female counterparts, though the mechanisms have become subtler and the language more carefully chosen to avoid obvious discrimination. Academic recognition came too late for her to witness, but validates the struggles she endured in lonely silence. Film scholars use her case to illustrate the disposable nature of female stardom in studio systems designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk, while her experience serves as textbook example of how society punishes women for behaviors it celebrates in men. Perhaps most significantly, her story has become inspiration for contemporary performers who refuse to accept the industry's traditional double standards as immutable facts of professional life. Young women entering entertainment now have access to her cautionary tale as armor against the same forces that destroyed her, learning from her experience to better protect themselves and support each other against systematic attempts to divide and conquer. The legacy isn't just about tragedy. It's about recognition, resistance, and the slow grinding work of changing systems that seemed unchangeable to previous generations. Every woman who now demands equal treatment, who refuses to accept blame for others' moral failings, who insists on the same redemption opportunities offered to male counterparts, stands on foundations built partly from her destroyed dreams. Her downfall has become other women's uprising, her exhibit status transformed into prosecutorial evidence against the system that created her tragedy. The cautionary tale has become a call to arms, the warning transformed into a weapon against the very forces that once wielded it with such devastating effectiveness. The flash that froze her face in that police station didn't prove her guilt. It proved the script was rigged from the beginning. Hollywood didn't erase Lila Leeds. It underlined the rules that governed who would be forgiven and who would be sacrificed, who would be celebrated and who would be cautioned against. Her fall became other women's armor, her destruction their motivation to demand better than the mercy Hollywood has historically refused to provide. The golden hair that once caught studio spotlights like spun silk continues catching attention in ways she never intended, but which serve purposes she would approve. Not as the star she dreamed of becoming, but as the symbol of injustice she was forced to embody. The mugshot that destroyed her career has become evidence in the ongoing case against systems designed to protect some while destroying others based on arbitrary characteristics they cannot control. The radar went quiet that September night in 1948, but the signal continues broadcasting across decades, carrying warnings and wisdom that grow more relevant rather than less with each passing year. In lecture halls and museum exhibits, in social media posts and documentary films, her story continues teaching lessons she paid everything to provide. Sometimes the most powerful performances happen after the cameras stop rolling, in the space between what was and what should never be again.